Hi, this is Taramis with World Building Academy, and today's tip is about how a quick and dirty way to create a Pangea globe for your world. If you're creating your world from the ground up and you want to think about, gee, how did that planetary formation come to be before you even get into the rest of your geography, this is one way that you can generate a globe from scratch, so to speak. Well, not the globe, but the surface features. So this harks back to the Pangea business of our own world when continental plates were initially more had coalesced into one big glob. We're going to start with the glob. And just as a sort of a visualization factor, this is kind of like when mud dries and it cakes up and it forms those broken up little squares. So this is sort of like, you want to think of this like a crusty bit on the skin of your globe that has clumped up together. Initially, it's going to look like one large mass, but in fact, it's going to, beneath the surface, it's going to follow stress lines and fractures and natural breaks where the earth chunks, the crust particles, are going to want to break apart. Just like in a field of dried mud, you can have these patterns that may not be evident at first, but they will become evident over time. These are going to be the lines along which your continents will split and then drift apart. So to start with, the grid that you see here is like a map grid, right? Yes, it has distortion to it, but we've seen those maps of the world that are just rectangular. So this is for the quick and dirty aspect. That's a grid of the globe. And this, let us say, is our primordial landmass that has, the globe is cooled and the crust has come together in certain areas clumpish. So this is our clump of basic landmass that is going to become continental plates drifting apart. So first off, okay, you can just take construction paper and do like I did here, or you can do this in a computer, or you can do it with tracing paper, whatever methodology works out for you. So anyway, we have our landmass, and the first thing to do is to determine what are the hidden fault lines here, the major schismatic lines that are going to split this puppy apart. So I'm going to take a moment here and just draw some random lines on this thing and come back in a second. Here's the key thing to keep in mind. This double line, if you can tell that that's a double line right here, it goes the length of this. It's like a seam on a baseball. You have to pick one longish line that's going to be the place where your geologic activity beneath the crust comes welling to the surface and starts to push things apart. Now, in our globe, that's right now where we call the Atlantic Ridge that runs over 12,000 miles from pole to pole, just about. And it began in our Pangea as a split between continental plates, and as it pushed things apart, ocean waters rushed in, and it grew further and wider and broader, and it turned into the Atlantic Ocean. So what we need here is the basic cleavage line along which our plates will split and fall apart afterwards. So for me, I just doodled this right here. That's going to be my first line. The other sections are entirely arbitrary. They should, at this point, be large chunks so they can break into smaller platelets later on. But that's how things begin. So the first step to do is whip out your handy-dandy little scissors and cut this apart so that you have movable pieces. Okay, plates cut apart. Now we have the central gap. Magma is going to come welling up along here and build a ridge, and it's going to push things apart with equal force in both of these directions. So along your baseline of the split, you're going to have geological forces going that way and going this way. So that's one thing to recall. The other thing to remember is that there's a little centrifugal force going on too. So our globe is not a perfect sphere. It bulges out more at the equator. Let's say this is our equatorial zone. Things are going to tend to drift towards the equator over time. All right, so if it's up here, it's going to tend to go that way, tend to go that way. That's a much milder force than the outward forces. Things are going to start drifting apart, and partly this is a random number count of the direction things are going in, and partly it's your creativity of where you want things to twirl and shift around. In reality, that's all based on very complex geologic processes. There are parts of the substrata here that are more firm and less mobile, and that will affect how things twist around and so on. So we're not in any way going to emulate that for this purpose. It's just an artistic exercise for you, so you can come up with something suitably semi-random that makes a kind of geological sense. That's the objective here. Of course, the alternative is you could just draw a map by hand. That's cool. But if you want to figure out how places got to where they are and you want it to make sense, here's your Pangea, and here's how things start moving. Okay, so here's the rules I use for moving this. Roll a 6-sided die. On a 1 or a 2, you can move things 1 square to the left or the right. Now, it depends on your center line here. On the right-hand side, they have to move to the right. On the left-hand side, they have to move to the left. Because remember, you have a ridge welling up here that's pushing things apart in those directions. So a d6 on a 1 to 6, a 1 to 2, that's how you move it, 1 square, either of those directions. If you roll a 3 or 4, you can move an additional square and give the piece a little bit of a turn. So this reflects that it's kind of twisting as it goes, like, a leaf floating in a stream. It'll twirl around a bit. Only here the process is much more gradual. Regarding how much I turn it, it's just a fractional bit, maybe an 1/8 of a turn, perhaps. Then if you roll a 5 or a 6, you can not only move it 1 square in either direction, you can also move it 1 up towards the equator. If your continental plates are bumping into each other, then let them edge and twirl around each other. So here I'm going to do a series of rolls, and I'll tell you what I come up with, and we'll see how the plates move. So here we go. I roll a 1. I roll a 4. Now that lets me move to a side and also towards the equator. Now, these two are, at this point, they're joined together, right? But if this one that I'm holding moves and twists towards the equator, I figure, okay, just my call from my logic, I figure it'll go like this. Kind of tip around the edge here, and here's where these two plates start to break apart a little bit. So, there we go. A little force towards the equator, and a little bit of drift as well, kicking in. And this guy, have a move to, and twist a little bit like that. Just a little. Yeah, we're getting off the map, and of course at some point things will circulate around and bang into each other in other corners of the globe, but we'll get there in a minute. I've decided in my head that this is going to be the most static continental plate. It's going to be the one most firmly rooted. Obviously these guys are spinning off into space. There's a little bit of a split going on there, but that's the one I think is going to be mostly relatively stable. And I'm going to go through a series of rolls. So he comes off this way, and it'll show up over here. In fact, on the back side of the globe, these guys are going to be banging into each other. Remember, the line that's pushing them apart is over here. So this is starting to shove things that way, shove things this way. Let's say a roll of 1. They just move a little closer. And let's say I roll a 6. If it looks like things are jumbled up, they are, and I'm going to include a link to an animated GIF so you can see how scientists have extrapolated continental plates actually floated around over millions of years and banged into each other, and they rearrange, and it's like, I don't know, it's like tossing a lot of debris in a stream and in a whirlpool or an eddy, and it jumps into each other and bumps and rearranges in a limited space. But that is exactly what these plates are going to do for a while. So I'm going to say that at some point here, because of this motion, let's say this continues, roll again, and he moves a little, and this business right here. Now, here's where I can start getting creative with mountain building. The forces these guys pushing together, they're going to start to grow mountains chains along the lines where they're pressing up against each other. So this is going to push up mountains. If they continue to grind together, those plates, the mountains are going to get higher and higher. If the plates drift apart, the mountains aren't going to continue to grow from that particular bit of pressure. We have these two pushing against each other here. Again, mountains. All right. So let's say we move a little more. This guy comes over here, and this continues to grind over this way. And let's say these mountains do get even higher. So here we're getting some big, hairy mountain chains going on. I think because of this pressure and interaction, that at some point here, this is going to push in here, and it's not only going to form mountains, but let's say, again, arbitrary choice, but it makes sense to my geology brain. Let's say that not only are we building mountains here, but it's causing stress fractures. Crack, 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 crack. We have earthquakes, we have fault lines, and suddenly this snaps off. So that becomes a separate little continental-sized thing. I don't know, what is that, the size of Australia or New Zealand? But that pressure is going to force that little bit of the continental plate to break into another plate. So as things continue to move, now we're going to have more pieces of the pie in action as individual chunklets. So I'll just move this around for a bit and see what I come up with. This could move around a lot more, cycle an awful lot more. We're talking, millions of years worth of Earth movement. But this is, like I said, a quick and dirty thing. So I've just moved them halfway around the globe because of the central outpushing of that mid-ocean fault line, and jumbled them up a bit here. And for me, for now, this is good to go. Now, this is just a rough idea of where land masses could be. Then you can also, of course, take this and rearrange things that suits you. Now, this doesn't look like much while it's paper cutouts on a graph board, but when you transfer this to a more properly drawn map, it's not such a bad start for where your planet may go from here. So I'll show you a more proper map version of this shortly. And whatever you look at next is going to be the finished version of this map based on this assortment of continental plates and the drift that happened that I just simulated in my quick and dirty manner from Pangaea to the scattering of continents. And here is what the final map looks like. So I hope you see some utility in this quick and dirty approach to creating Pangaea. It's not sophisticated, not meant to be. These are incredibly complex processes, and this is not really intended to be a geological model at all. This is just a way to get from large, crusty landmass on globe to an assortment of continental plates that might make sense, rationally speaking, if you want to evolve your planet from the ground up in that manner. Don't have to, but if you want to, this is one way to do it. For more how-to and free weekly world-building tips, check out the URL below. Meanwhile, thanks for listening. This is Taramis with the World Building Academy. Create worlds, change lives.